we begin with the introductory, the chapter guide, and immediately we have this important phrase that focusing in particular on his crucial and controversial claim that freedom is most fully realized in the state. So again, in an important sense, this is the key idea in all of Hegel. And like any question you get on Hegel on the University of London, this has to be your crucial thesis. Like your thesis has to walk around this issue. Like if you're writing about war, it doesn't matter. Still, for Hegel, war is valuable because in some interesting and controversial way, war helps bring human freedom to its full realization, which is only possible in the state. Again, the constitutional state of laws, or the well-constituted state at the end of history, the Rechtsstaat. Okay, so we can probably skip further. So yeah, of course, yeah, we talk about all this stuff. Yeah, so the French Revolution, again, an important sense, is one of the key elements of Hegel's background. So then, if we drop down, of course, the key ideas, something to watch out for. Okay, actually, no. Before we talk about that, yeah. So here we have it. So after lecturing on political philosophy, yeah. So it's talking about the reforms, and especially here in 1807, but shortly after his arrival in Berlin, reforms came abruptly to an end, and the ascendant reactionary regime imposed censorship on academic publication and witch hunt for demagogues from the universities. In this environment, Hegel was forced to tone down some of his reformist sympathies. In the preface to the Philosophy of Right, to flatter the authorities in various ways. He has been regarded by some as state philosopher of the Prussian authoritarianism, but this is not really accurate. Hegel was concerned to keep his position and could be timid and cautious by disposition, so did not wish to antagonize the authorities unnecessarily. But he found subtle ways to communicate his reformist leanings and even expressed his ongoing commitment to the ideal of the French Revolution with an annual toast among his friends on the Bastille Day. So again, so this is an important section in all sorts of ways. You see, Alan Patten is unapologetic. Different commentators approach Hegel differently. Alan Patten takes no prisoners. He says, no, Hegel is a liberal reformer. Okay, and if like without ifs or buts, that's sort of his official position. Okay, so yeah, so let's continue. Yeah, so then Alan Patten talks about how Hegel is very complicated, and this is definitely something that you should at least mention in your exams. Definitely, the sort of Hegel writes this complicated prose, which is hard to interpret. Like Hegel is widely acknowledged to be difficult to read. Okay, and then in the next section we get from Patten, we get his triad of what he thinks is most important in Hegel, and specifically his concept of freedom, his idea of spirit, and the dialectic. Now, not necessarily the way I would focus, but this is Alan Patten. Okay, so yeah, so he says the first aim is to explain these concepts. The second aim is to focus on the crucial and controversial claim that freedom is most fully realized only in the state. In doing so, I try to offer a distinctive account of Hegel's thought in which the problem of consolidating the promise and principles of the French Revolution emerges as central to Hegel's political theory. So again, so this is important. And again, when you talk about sort of who Hegel is and how come he's a liberal, this is the way Alan Patten likes to phrase this. That sort of Hegel is committed to the ideals of the French Revolution, and sort of this whole issue with the Rechtsstaat is basically an attempt to answer the question of how can you have how can you realize ideals of the French Revolution in practice. So this is important. Okay, so we drop down obviously all these key ideas. This is a section to be read and reread very carefully. Obviously, I hope you're doing this. So yeah. So dialectics, there's a lot of complicated stuff, but again, I think a slightly more lucid sentence is this notion that the best way to understand some particular phenomena is by working through the sequence of contradictions and resolutions that make phenomena what it is. Okay, so when we talk about freedom, freedom of the will is free when its ends are its own. So it is self-determining. The will is self-determining in turn when two conditions are satisfied. One, subjective. So when I talk about subjective and objective conditions of freedom, this is language out of Alan Patten. So this is crucially important. And again, reading and rereading this section on key ideas, definitely something that you should do and everybody should do. I mean, in principle, I could have, go and read all this, but hopefully you can do this on your own. Yeah. And so he says the subjective condition is that the will reflects on its ends, and the objective condition requires that the will pursue ends and goals that are rational. So so on the one hand, the goals have to be rational, but on the other, we're talking about its ends on the basis of its given desires and goals. Its given desires and goals. So again, keep this in mind. So yeah, I mean, this is again very important answering to the question of why Hegel is not a totalitarian. I mean, he is a supporter of freedom, but freedom requires conditions. Yeah, and then he explains so both in the subjective sense, grounded in reflexively endorsed desires and valuations, and the objective sense, that they're grounded in his own true goals and purposes as a rational being. Okay, so then we talk about history of stages of development of spirit, the process in which individuals, cultures, and God develop and extend their powers of intellect and will. So maybe let me underline this. So individuals, cultures, and God. So again, so when we talk about spirit, Geist, we're talking about individual spirit. Then we talk about Volksgeist, the spirit of the nation, and Weltgeist, which is, with some qualifications, like cautiously can be identified with the Hegelian God. So spirit is a term used by Hegel to designate three levels. So exactly what I talked about before. So the individual level, a human group that possesses a culture, and you see again, you could say that again, Volksgeist basically, when we talk about Geist, when we talk about spirit for Hegel, basically we mean culture. And again, the word culture is used by Patten here. Okay, and yeah, so let me also stress this again, this notion that God achieves a fully realized self-consciousness through the vehicle of the human world. Again, be careful, be cautious when talking about God in Hegel, but you need to talk about God. Okay. And again, please read and reread this section very carefully on key ideas. It's good. Okay, so yeah. So the introduction. So the task of philosophy is to identify and display the reason contained in the actual institution and practices of the social world. To identify and display the reason contained in the actual institutions and practices. So again, this phrase, was vernünftig ist, das ist wirklich, und was wirklich ist, das ist vernünftig. What is real is rational, what is rational is real. Again, to identify and display the rational in the real. Okay. Yeah. So and very importantly, again, what we are looking for is the reconciliation of the reader with the world in which they live. Again, in some deep sense, for Hegel, the task of philosophy is not to change the world; it is the task of history to change the world. But now that history's job is over and we have reached the end of history, now the task of philosophy is not to change the world, but to interpret the world in such a way that it does not need changing. Okay, again, not to change the world, but to interpret the world in such a way that it does not need changing. Yeah, so Hegel is notoriously confident that philosophy will be able to find reasons, right? Yeah, so confident that reason will be able to find reasons. Again, in some sense, this is Hegelian assumption, and if this does not hold true, that's a whole separate criticism. But like, it's not. You have to understand, like Hegel assumes that sort of you will find this at the end of the tunnel, but in a deep sense, there is no guarantee. So, like if you disagree that we have reached the end of history, it is a partial disagreement with Hegel, but it doesn't have to be a full disagreement with Hegel, because again, Hegel assumes that you will be able to ultimately reconcile yourself to the world. But very importantly, if you will not be able to reconcile yourself to the world, if we actually have not reached the end of history, then Hegel would have to take a step back and say, well, okay, yeah, the work of history has not been yet accomplished. Yeah, and so he says, so Hegel dismisses philosophers who devote their energies to imagining the world as it ought to be, rather than looking for reasons in it here and now. And again, he says that gaze of philosophy is backward looking. So not to try to imagine the world. So Hegel dismisses philosophers who try to imagine the world as it ought to be. And this is something that I think relates Hegel to Marx. So we can compare. So this is similar to Marx, because Marx is against utopian imaginings or imagination. He is for um, um, understanding what is the rationality behind the processes that appear in the world. Again, so Marx is, let's say, he's a critic of capitalism, but he first wants to understand the reason why capitalism exists. Let me also add a note here. Again, this idea that not to change the world, but to reinterpret in such a way that it does not need changing. Okay, so let's continue. So the systematic development of the book's argument begins in introduction. Yes, so we're talking about rights and legal rights, freedom, condition of expression of freedom. Physical philosophy, right? Yeah, well, okay. I'm not sure to what extent we need to go here, but again, I mean, this sounds like an important sentence, that the main task of philosophy of right is to demonstrate that the system of right represents the realm of actualized freedom. So this is which is to say that freedom can be fully realized only in a constitutional state of laws, only in the Rechtsstaat, which is a constitutional state of laws. So anyway, so Hegel divides his task into two parts. The first part, technical introduction itself, consists of investigating into what freedom is, and second part explores the objective conditions. Okay, this is probably not really important. Hegel holds that true nature of freedom is best discovered in the very process of working out institutions and practices that give actuality to freedom. Yeah. So dynamic relationship with the various modes of reality in which achieves existence. Okay, I'm not sure if this is all really that important, but let's let me just underline this. It's best discovered. So in some sense, Hegel is saying that if you want to understand what freedom is, you need to look at how the process of liberation is historically embedded, how it's embedded in history, in actual history. Let me write this: embedded in actual human history. Okay, let's continue. So yeah, so the remainder of philosophy right is divided into three sections: abstract right, morality, and ethical life. Now, let's be very careful. Abstract right is not the same thing as pure indeterminacy, or at least it feels to me that it's not the same thing as pure indeterminacy. Seems to not be identical to pure indeterminacy. So let's be careful. So this is a triad which is similar, but I feel that this is a different triad. Okay. Yeah. So we talk about a person, a subject, and a member. A person, a subject, and a member. Now this is crucially important. This is crucially important, and we need to keep this in mind. Can I close this? Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Yeah. So with the transition from one understanding of the agent to the next, the previous one is never discarded. Never discarded. Again, the German word for this is Aufhebung. Aufhebung, usually translated into English as sublimation. The sort of later stages are preserved. Sorry, earlier stages are preserved in the later stages. Maybe I should add this. So earlier stages are preserved in later stages of development. So he says, thus, the moral subject is also a person. And the member of the ethical life is bearer of both personality and subjectivity. Okay. So then next section, and especially, okay, so say hi to Isaiah Berlin. And we talk about positive freedom indeed. So this is all crucially important for our purposes. Yeah, so it does not consist in the absence of obstacles or impediments, which is what Berlin means by negative freedom, but in the presence of certain kinds of relationships or connection between agent and his activity. I am free in this positive sense when I am shaping and controlling my own life. When to use Hegel's own language, I am self-determining. So yeah, so freedom, according to Hegel, consists in being with oneself in another, being with oneself in another. So maybe I should add this. So we talk about freedom in itself, freedom for itself, and so freedom in itself, I would say this is abstract. Freedom for itself is subjective or moral, and and the objective is freedom with oneself in another. This is objective. And again, what does this mean? Freedom with oneself in another. This means I am only free in society. I can only be free in society. So I can only be free together with others through my companionship with others. Yeah, so I cannot become free by avoiding otherness, by refusing to commit myself to any activity or relationship with others. But even if I do engage with otherness in some way, it does not follow that I'm necessarily free. I must be free with myself. So simply obedience to the laws is not sufficient for freedom. You also need to be with yourself. So subjective element is also important. So again, so yeah, so and we keep talking about this like a million times, but then again, so we have objectively free, subjectively free. We explain this. So let me skip over. So Hegel's idea of subjective freedom tracks to a considerable degree intuitive understanding of freedom. So again, and then the objective freedom, by contrast, is far less familiar. The objective far less familiar. An agent is free only when he has the ends and motives that reason prescribes. And again, maybe, I don't know, maybe I should add this. Compare, so similar to Rousseau's general will. Let's just sort of keep this here. Okay, so putting elements together. So I am free only if both conditions are satisfied, and an agent is only fully free when he has specific ends and adopts a certain codes of conduct. Yeah. So Hegel's conception of freedom not only competes with common sense, but it also seems to rely on a problematic picture: human self as divided into several parts. Yeah. Where's this? Yeah. So human self divided into several parts: empirical self and real self. So it basically means that people can make mistakes. And, people, I mean, philosophers, commentators like Isaiah Berlin find this deeply problematic, but actually, I'm not sure what is so problematic about this. I mean, the idea that you can make mistakes is presumably like a complete platitude. We all know that human beings can make mistakes. There's nothing miraculous about this. I would imagine that the biggest problem is that, so this is relatively uncontroversial. So let me write, this is uncontroversial. But what is really controversial is the idea that others or social customs know better. That's controversial. That's very controversial. And again, the reason, of course, why we can trust, so why trust custom? Because we believe in natural, historical natural selection. or actually, I mean, we're going to talk about three answers. Well, actually, so three answers, and key answer for me is historical natural selection, because the other two are less clear. Anyway, so for Hegel, according to merely acting on my own empirically given desires and motives is not enough for self-determination. So this could be whims. So not enough. So let me write the word whims. So I'm only self-determining, both subjectively and objectively, if my desires coincide with those prescribed by reason. And so Berlin thinks that this is an artificial and highly dubious division between actual empirical self and the real self. And again, Berlin thinks this is controversial, but we all do this. We all do this with compare to children. We all do this with respect to children, okay, or mad people. Yeah. So why think that reason is more authentic part of the self that empirically given desires and ambitions? In some sense, this is the key question. So and of course, what we end up with is this leads to a grossly illiberal view that it's possible to force someone to be free. Force someone to be free. Again, say hi to Rousseau. So if the wise and the virtuous were better able to identify prescriptions of reason, ordinary people, then what would stop them from forcing, coercing, or manipulating those people into adopting the ends in order to make them free? So yeah. So again, let me maybe underline this, because this is really crucially important. The concept of freedom can normally be deployed against, but Hegel claimed that full freedom is achieved only in the context of the state, simply reinforces the worry about this position. So freedom is achieved only in the context of the state. And here we talk about, of course, Hegel is not the first philosopher to say this. Rousseau had a similar notion: to be driven by appetite alone is slavery. Kant has a similar notion. Okay, so what is puzzling, however, given the apparent similarity of his own view, is how forcefully Hegel objects to the account of both Rousseau and Hegel. Sorry, of both Rousseau and Kant. So Hegel objects. This is important. Okay, this is crucially important. Hegel versus Rousseau and Kant. So Rousseau is debunked for failing to go beyond a mere aggregation of particular wills to truly general will, and Kant's own solution problem is dismissed as empty formalism and empty rhetoric of duty for duty's sake. So all this is crucially important. Failing to go beyond particular wills to truly general will, and Kant's own solution dismiss empty formalism, empty rhetoric of duty for duty's sake. Okay. So in light of these criticisms, it's far from clear how Hegel himself proposes to generate content for freedom. And yeah, so in some sense, this is the most important part. This is why we're reading Boucher. Okay, this paragraph is why we are reading Boucher. Again, freedom is both abstraction and particular content. Two elements: element of pure determinacy and absolute abstraction, element of determination and particularization. So we talk about, again, abstraction, particularization. Again, we have this pure indeterminacy that we've seen already, and absolute abstraction, element of determination and particularization. Yeah. So the claim that abstraction is essential for freedom. So it's like, I'm not free if I simply accept some externally given command. I am not free. I must be able to stand back. So this is basically the moment of pure indeterminacy. Which is, again, akin to the subjective condition. Again, Hegel associates this idea with the process of Reformation, and especially Martin Luther. So again, we kept talking about historical background, and yes, so when we talk about historical background, French Revolution is important, and Protestant Reformation is important. So I would say Protestant Reformation, French Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution. I should add. We did not have Protestant Reformation in the slides, so let me add that: Protestant Reformation. explanation. It's important. Okay. Yeah, so for Luther, true spirituality is not just individual outer actions, but also of his inner faith and understanding. So again, like in general, if you understand Luther's theology, I think this already gives you a good grasp of what Hegel is talking about when he talks about freedom, what he means by freedom. Unquestioning acceptance of promptings of the social and natural environment generates one's desires and inclinations, no more mark of freedom than is uncritical obedience to authority. So, so basically, Hegel says that simple obedience to the laws is not a good thing. So again, so uncritical obedience to authority is bad. Okay, bad. So to anybody who thinks that Hegel is a blind state worshiper, this is what we counterpose. Uncritical obedience to authority is bad. You need both subjective and objective. Okay. Yeah. So at the same time, freedom is not just abstraction; it also involves having particular motives. And Hegel denies that freedom is achieved by simply refusing to act at all. But this presents a difficulty. How could will be both totally abstract and have particular content? So both totally abstract and have particular content. Imagine, for instance, asking some agent why he acted the way he did, and he's answering with an appeal to some desired authority. Then we ask him why he takes that desired authority to be a good reason. He responds by citing some further desired authority, and so on. Eventually, the agent may simply put a stop to this chain of reasoning by insisting, that some authority constitutes his bedrock for his actions. If he does this, however, he'll be violating his freedom abstraction requirements. On the other hand, if he does not stop his deliberation in some way, then his reasoning would be extended ad infinitum. Either way, it seems a contradiction between two elements of freedom, which cast doubt whether anyone can actually be free. For Hegel, the key to understanding freedom is finding resolution of this contradiction. So again, notice. So, like I ask you, remember we have the abstract, the subjective, and the objective elements. The abstract, the subjective, and the objective elements. So here in this passage, we are talking about abstraction. So I am asking you, why do you do a certain thing? If you point to a desire, that's a subjective reason, which has to do with morality. If I point to an authority, this is objective, and corresponds to ethics. But you see, Hegel says that sort of neither of the two will suffice. You have to first abstractly decide to either go along with your desires or go along with authorities. So either way, you have to choose. Like I don't know. Like yes, I don't know. Why he takes. So it's like the individual, you have to decide. So one has to decide to obey his subjective desires or laws of the community. But what is important here, that one has to decide. It's still your choice, and this is why one has to still decide to obey. And in this sense, abstract is prior. Abstract freedom is prior to both subjective and objective, or let me say prior to both morality and ethics. On the one hand, these are complicated paragraphs. On the other, we keep talking about this over and over and over again. So I hope this is more or less clear. So again, unfortunately, the details of Hegel's solution are not as clear as they might be, but the general trust of his position is not difficult to grasp. His key claim is that when an agent abstracts away from his own contingent given desires and goals, he will eventually arrive at a set of rational norms and duties that he finds himself committed to just in virtue of being a free agent. So just in virtue of being a free agent. This is crucially important. Being committed to these norms and duties is part of what it is to be a free agent, and thus do not themselves call for further abstraction. It is because abstraction leads back to these rational norms and duties that Hegel thinks that freedom has an objective dimension, that full freedom involves commitment to the ends and motives reason prescribes. The agent who rejects, the agent who, whoops, the agent who rejects the ends prescribed by reason, Hegel thinks, ultimately is not deciding for himself, but he's letting whatever external processes determine his particular goals and desires for him. So again, like to oversimplify, slavery to passion is not freedom. If he does follow the ends prescribed by reason, on the other hand, then his activity is an expression of norms and duties he is committed to just in virtue of being a free agent. Freedom is not a matter of the right part of the self being a... Well, anyway, so the idea of freedom is opposed to authority and so involves abstraction. He can refer to the same abstraction charge. Freedom is not a matter of the right part of the self ruling, but of the self deliberating about its ends and motives in the right kind of way. Yeah, so this is supposedly answer to Berlin. Against this Berlin's distinction between this empirical self and the real self. This is by the way, I mean, this stuff about real self and empirical self. This is actually fairly important. Let me go back here for 1 second. Yeah. So artificial highly dubious distinction between the actual or empirical self and the real self of reason. So this is like crucially important. Okay. And again, I hope that this is blatantly clear. Again, like empirical self, slavery to passions, real self for reason. This is like Rousseau's general will. What is really objectively good for you? Like again, this empirical self, like empirically, this child wants to drink bleach, but objectively, it is bad for the child to drink bleach. Again, I hope this is all screamingly obvious and boring. Yes. Okay. So justice spirituality for Luther requires inner reconciliation with God, and not just outer performance. Same Hegel thinks is true for freedom. Concrete freedom requires not just performing actions prescribed by reason, but also having the right motives, and which makes those actions reasonable. It requires not only objective freedom, but also subjective freedom. Again, like especially this comparison to Luther, I think is very important. Again, if you understand I keep circling around Luther because in Protestant theology, you are supposed to obey God, but you freely obey God. So obey God freely. So you obey and you are free. This is the important element. Okay, the most difficult issue, and like if I could triple underline, I would need to do so. Again, so the most important issue, that brings us back to Hegel's disagreement with Rousseau and Kant, and again, so here we have Rousseau and Kant, concerns reason. Why do we think that abstraction eventually leads back? What is the content of these norms and duties? Hegel criticizes Kant for failing to answer the first of these questions. Kantian freedom, he says, is just negative of everything else. Kantian freedom is just the negative of everything else. And for giving the answer to the second of these questions, famous categorical imperative is itself an empty formalism. Again, this is important. But these charges just raise the bar as far as Hegel's own view is concerned. Why should we think that Hegel's view of freedom and reason has positive and non-empty content? So Hegel's position of this issue is very hard to make out. Not surprisingly, okay, so here we have these three interpretations. So we have these three interpretations. And this is in the file. So the first one is by Charles Taylor, and again, metaphysical theory of spirit. So this is interpretation number one, and basically, so again, so this is again, what is the question? The question is, in some sense, why should I trust the customs of my community. This is the oversimplified version of the question. And the first answer, I have to trust the customs of my community because they are a product of God's reason or God's rationality. Okay. Yeah. So on a different reading, Hegel's alternative to Kant involves an appeal to an essentially historical idea of reason. Notice, we are not. He does not give a name, but whatever. And this is where basically like quasi-Darwinian natural selection. And sort of this one I think is far and away the most important one. Okay, so like for me, if I could like triple, I don't do I have like I don't know a different color or something? Like if I could use text of different color. How to do this? I wonder. Anyway, now this is like super crucially, critically important. Okay, I would say this is like sort of where the rubber hits the road. Like this essentially historical idea of reason. This is the most important phrase in all of Boucher. Okay. And the third one, plausible interpretation, consistent. Okay, so and notice they talk about the first one they call metaphysical and the second one they call historicist. So actually, let me use these phrases. So this one is metaphysical, and the second one is historicist. So and the third one seems to be Rousseauian. I don't actually see the difference between this one and Rousseau, but let's read it. Instead, let me suggest a third possible. So he says, let me suggest a third possible interpretation. So this is Alan Patten himself. Okay, so when you want to cite this on the University of London, you cite Alan Patten. Probably the best thing to do is to cite his book, and his book is called Hegel's Idea of Freedom, and this book is Oxford University Press, 1999. So Alan Patten, 1999. Okay, like if you want to cite something, this is what you cite. And the name of the book is Hegel's Idea of Freedom, but you can look this up in the end of Boucher. Yeah. So what is this third possibility? So Hegel insisted the will abstract from its own contingent given desires. Still remains committed to one end, the end of establishing and maintaining its own freedom, the end of establishing and maintaining its own freedom. Again, I see no difference between this and Rousseau. Will of God identical to will of self. Freedom is willed by freedom. This is the third explanation. Freedom is willed by freedom. And why is this Rousseau? Individual dictates himself to the good of the community. Individual dedicates himself to the good of the community as a whole, and thereby to one of the essential conditions of his own freedom. Okay, so this seems to be Rousseau, like 100%. Let me pause here for just 1 second. And again, in some sense, like this is far and away the most important thing why we're reading Boucher. If you've gotten this far, if you understood this, today's class is not wasted on you. Again, so the question is, why should I trust the laws of my community? The first answer by Charles Taylor is that I should trust the laws of my community because they're given by God through the process of history. The second one, let's imagine that there's no God, but still the process of history is rational, it's this quasi-Darwinian natural selection, and I can trust that the laws of my country cannot be too bad because they are a result of this long process. And in fact, hopefully we're standing at the end of this process when we have achieved the end of history. And the third interpretation is again 100% Rousseau. Like, why do I want to be committed to the laws of my community? Because I am only free with the help of my community. And so, sort of, if I decide to disregard the laws of my community, who will protect me? Who will enable me? Sort of again, looking outside the window and seeing the police not as restricting your freedom, but as enabling your freedom. I hope this is all screamingly obvious. If you have questions about this, definitely do ask. I'm not sure I want to pause now, but feel free to write questions in the chat or save them for the seminar. But these three interpretations are super critically, crucially important. You have to know this, you have to understand this, and you have to write about this in any question on Hegel. Let me stress this, regardless of what question you're going to get, you will need to write about all three. Okay, so we talk about Hegel's state worshiper, or you talk about war. Even when you talk about war, the reason why war is good is one of the three: either because war is willed by God, or second reason is because war is this a necessary element in this Darwinian natural selection, or the third is because war ultimately, in some indirect ultimate way, is a condition of my freedom in the state in a Rousseauian fashion. I hope that this is more or less clear, but again, let's talk about this more in the seminar. Okay, so yeah, and so then he continues talking about why shouldn't free agent also be abstracted from this end, from end of freedom? And Hegel's answer is cannot be free without being committed to this end, or put differently, being committed to this end is the basis of free agency, and thus no limitation on it. Unless an agent had commitment to becoming and remaining free, he would never engage in the kind of radical reflection and abstraction that sets up a protocol identifying the content for freedom in the first place. So what the hell are we talking about here? We are talking about can you want to stop being free? And sort of so Hegel thinks it is essentially irrational and self-contradictory to freely will stop being free. This is a technical, pedantic point. If you don't get it, don't worry too much, okay? So again, let's continue. So Hegel was greatly impressed with personal reformation and also the French Revolution. Again, represented the extension of this into the social and political realm of the same principle he admitted in Rousseau and Kant. So again, so here we have Rousseau and Kant. At the same time, he worried that on its own, so no, this is crucially important. At the same time, he worried that on its own, subjectivity could be a terribly destructive force. So freedom, so negative freedom, destroys itself. Okay, this is important. Could negate and undermine authorities, tradition, structures, leaving nothing in the place. He would suggest that terror was a logical outcome of the French Revolution. This is important, again. However, the solution in Hegel's view is not to reject subjectivity or to limit it. Rather, it is to perceive that subjectivity is itself ultimately an individual social historical achievement which depends so on individual being committed to particular ends and duties. So again, freedom has conditions, and these conditions are social, individual social and historical, social and historical conditions. Individual social and historical conditions. I hope so far everything is clear. So these conditions of subjectivity are what provide the content of the objective freedom, extent of reason, which objective dimension of freedom refers ultimately to one explicit and social subjectivity itself. The usually committed to the standard, they enjoyed both objective and fully free in Hegel's account. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe let me also stress this. So again, so the point of objective freedom. So objective freedom is objective in a sense that it gives rational or objective conditions of being free. Okay, that's the whole point. Like subjective freedom on its own, whereas subjective freedom on its own by itself, or let's say alone, could lead to self-destruction. And again, and notice, we just said, I had this. Hegel thinks that it is essentially irrational, self-contradictory to freely stop wanting to be free. And this is incidentally why, therefore, negative freedom is insufficient. Okay. I hope that you are following. Again, if you are getting questions, by all means, feel free to write in the chat. Mm. Okay, so let me before we proceed to the next section, let me just pause and briefly answer Daniil's question. So Daniil's question is this the same as the social contract? Now, it's very important to understand. Hegel is a critic of the social contract because the cause or the root of the objective conditions of freedom is the historical process. Again, you have this individual, social, and historical achievement. And this individual, social, and historical achievement, so history, not social contract. Hegel does not believe in a social contract. So Hegel does not believe in the social contract. Why? Because to be a member of society, to be a member of a society is not a choice, and also to reshape society is also not a choice, but it happens organically, not a choice, but is a product of history.
I'm sorry, but if we take the third interpretation by Alan Patten, like freedom is willed by freedom, so all people are free to dedicate themselves to the community. Yeah, это не то же самое, что и social
No,
contract.
no, 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 no. Because, like, okay, I mean, again, why not a social contract? Because still, it's not your free choice to be a member of society. Like so. I mean, okay, let me express this as clearly as I can. Social contract is a product of individual reason, whereas Hegelian Rechtsstaat is a product of historical reason. Let me add this. Let me add this to my condition. So history, not social contract. So social contract is a product of individual reason, but Rechtsstaat is a product of historical reason. Like social contract is far too subjectivist for Hegel. Social contract is far too subjectivistic. This is exactly why he criticizes Rousseau. He thinks that Rousseau is far too subjectivist. Anyway, in the interest of saving time, and I want to get to the end of Alan Wood. Sorry, not Alan Wood, but Alan Patten. So let's continue. So anyway, so then we talk about again spirit and dialectic. And when we talk about spirit, we're talking about we're talking about three possible forms of spirit. So the first one is individual. The second one is the spirit of the nation, and the third spirit is the world spirit. So again, this is important, but hopefully it's clear, and you've heard this before. And there's a certain homology between the three. So it seems that when Hegel talks about God, he says God is like individual consciousness, but like larger above that. Like, but in some deep sense, sort of God achieves self-consciousness in the like. Let me maybe write this. So maybe what Hegel means. So let me underline this. Maybe what Hegel means is that God and the German nation achieve self-realization in the mind of Hegel. And on this level, so the individual would be equal to the Volks, would be equal to the Weltgeist. Okay? So this is homology. Don't take this with a grain of salt. So first of all, maybe that's one interpretation, and secondly, Hegel is valuable without religion. The religious side of Hegel is not very interesting. So again, then Boucher, and hopefully you'll read this on its own, talks about individual mind. Then he talks the idea of spirit. It's more difficult. Group sense is more difficult. Hegel does not think that groups have minds, but we are talking about culture. We are talking about culture. A group can be thought of achieving kind of freedom of subconscious as long as we remain clear that it does so through the vehicle of its members. So again, through the vehicle of its members. Anyway, so by encouraging qualities of agency in members. Okay, read this on your own, okay, and carefully. So most difficult of all is Hegel's idea of world spirit. This is the most difficult idea, and again, religious circular interpretations, collective practice of freedom only possible in virtue of particular historical inheritance. Public freedom does not create itself ex nihilo growth of progression from one Volksgeist to the next. So again, so the way that the Weltgeist is instantiated is sort of, so the Weltgeist, Weltgeist passes, let's say, from the Greeks to the Romans, to the French, to the Germans. You know, sort of with some question mark. But sort of the world spirit for Hegel, like you cannot relate to the world spirit directly, only through the nation. That's why duty to the state is the highest religious duty. Okay. Yeah. So again, it's important to avoid temptation of thinking that such a world spirit literally has agency or consciousness. It is progress and flourishing always achieved through the vehicle of particular collective. Again. So the secular interpretation. So if you want to say that Hegel is an atheist, it is possible to say that Hegel is an atheist. Let me. So through the vehicle of particular collective practices of freedom, which themselves makes ordinary reflective human agents. This is atheistic interpretation of Hegel, and specifically atheist interpretation of world spirit. So world spirit is a certain dynamic which ultimately bottoms out in reflective human agents, individual human agents. So on this reading, only individuals are truly conscious. Okay? And sort of Volksgeist and Weltgeist have this sort of borrowed existence which rests on the existence of the individuals. Anyway, so the story of world spirit's development, increasingly sophisticated practice of freedom, is the story of God's progress towards freedom, so conscious completion through the vehicle of human individuals and their cultures. So this is the religious. This is the sorry, don't need to do that. This would be the religious interpretation. Okay. Okay. Hopefully this is all very clear. Let's proceed. So again, so we are talking about three different levels: individual, nation, and world, and sort of this has to be kept in mind. The theoretically interesting significance of these calls between individual collective senses, social context, social environment. So individual and collective sense, social environment. So this is Hegel as a communitarian. Communitarianism, that freedom can only flourish in a well-constituted community. And this is overlooked by Hegel by social contract again. So this is against social contract. So versus social contract. So this is again another answer to Daniel's question. We're not talking about social contract because it's not a choice, not a choice for Hegel, but something that's given to you by your environment. In insisting that all political legitimacy is grounded in individual consent, contractarians ignore the role played by social political settings in constituting free individuals in the first place. So this is very important. Okay, so this is in turn backed up by an argument about the importance of recognition to develop a outlook for individuality. Okay, this is kind of important, but this is advanced. Okay, let me signal this is advanced. I don't expect most people to write about this, but yeah, Hegel has this notion of recognition. That sort of one intrinsic element, essential element of being a developed personality is being recognized by others. And yeah, we talk about the struggle for recognition in Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, which is a different book which we're not reading. So this is like advanced. It's only possible to develop a sense of oneself that is free through the practice of mutual recognition involving individuals. It is only possible. It's only concept of public cultural freedom, in which certain ideas, practices, and self-understanding prevail, certain pathways, mutual recognition established that practice institutes involved in individual free agency are fostered and nourished. Spirit is an I, that is we that is an I. Okay, let me underline this and also this one. Okay, so so we always have to keep this multivalent character in mind. On the one level, we're talking about individuals. On a different level, we're talking about cultures. And on a third level, we are talking about tinged with the divine. We're talking about world spirit. So again, one level individual, another level culture, third level world spirit. Okay. So this is sort of here we end, and this section. Then we talk about dialectic. Hegelian dialectic involves both an ontological thesis about natural reality and an epistemological thesis about how reality is to be understood. So this is also advanced. Okay, if you don't understand this too much, don't worry. Both rely on the ideas of contradiction and resolution of contradiction. So ideas of contradiction, resolution of contradiction. So the ontological thesis calls that a given piece of reality is always constituted by both a contradiction. Resolution epistemological affirms that the best way to understand is by working through the sequence contradictions, resolutions, and what. So again, this is advanced stuff. If you understand this, excellent. If you don't, skip it. Okay, so to say that some area of life is afflicted by contradiction is to say that the very success of that reality of fulfilling its purpose is dedicated, will eventually bring about its own demise. Will eventually bring about its own demise. So specifically, again, we're talking about how negative freedom destroys itself. We keep circling around this idea over and over and over again. So here we talk about Marx. Say hi to Marx. Just passing by. By the way, so the German word is Aufhebung. Yeah, so we talked about so this sublimation, which is both preservation and cancellation, but also lifting up. Literally, Aufhebung means lifting up, so some kind of development. Anyway, so Hegelian dialectic always being, dialectic always begins by some extremely minimal abstract characterization, self-defeating, and capable of sustaining on its own. Self-defeating, capable of sustaining on its own. Again, so again. Our example would be negative freedom is self-defeating and incapable of sustaining its own. Negative freedom destroys itself. So eventually, complex highly differentiated final characterization is arrived at, which resolves the contradictions generated, which is reasonably self-sufficient. And this would be the positive freedom. The sequence of stages of spirit of development in the philosophy of right proceeds exactly in this dialectical fashion. It starts by specifying extremely minimal abstract model. The model is minimal, since it assumes only a very basic concept of free agency. The argument then proceeds to show how features of this initial picture are indispensable for collective practice of freedom, but also on their own self-sufficient and not self-sufficient and self-undermining. So this is like sort of the structure of philosophy of right, the work that we're reading. So indispensable, but also self-undermining. And again, so basically, what are we talking about? We're talking about abstract right, moral subjectivity, and ethical community membership. I don't know. Yes. Yeah. So the result is Hegel can pull off is a rich and highly differentiated picture of necessary structure and and content of the social world of freedom. One that he thinks would correspond in its essential form to the modern European social world in which he lives. So so which is actually realized again. So we are already in the end of history, he thinks, Hegel thinks. If we're willing to affirm the first simple model as a necessary part of any successful practice of freedom, then we have reason to affirm and feel reconciled with our own world and social world as well. Affirm and feel reconciled. This is important. Overall, then, two features of structure method are essential. Yeah. So yeah. So split dialectic, whatever. Focus. Keep three distinct balls in the air. So individual, collective, God. Okay, this is all recap. We talked about all this. Yeah, so we talk about two features. We talk about three distinct balls in the air. Again, we keep talking about how this individual, and then collective, and then also God. Okay. Let's continue. Yeah. So the central assumption. So we keep circling around this. So abstract right, morality, and ethical life seem not only to be persons, but also subjects. So persons, subjects, and members, respectively. So personality, most abstract, immediate, minimal conception of freedom. To be a person is to recognize, I mean, whatever. So this is personality. Then we talk about abstract right. Read this carefully on your own. Yeah, so one positive, the other one negative. The positive aim is to determine the institutional shape, and so feel reconciled. The negative aim is to show collective practice of freedom involving only persons and institutions. Practices grounded in personality would not be viable. So again, so yeah, so the positive aim is this, and the negative aim is this, and the negative aim would not be viable. This is crucially important. Well, I mean, not crucially important, but we keep talking about this. So how negative freedom destroys itself. Face we have seen so many times before in this class. Anyway, so yeah. So again, so we talk about property. This is kind of important, but also kind of boring. Let's talk about this in the seminar. Sort of the first is person's object to himself, and the second claim is that experience allows him to become an actual will. And sort of Hegel gives this interesting sort of yeah. So Hegel's position is that it is important for individuals to have property because it is important they develop and sustain their personalities. And Hegel sort of Patten here contrasts, well, not contrasts, but compares Hegel to Marx. And this, again, this notion that you need to have property to be a person, this can be seen as an indirect argument for communism. Okay, so indirect argument for communism, because under capitalism, the vast majority of people, which is by the way still true today, do not own any property or any meaningful property. Okay, so yeah, let's proceed. So what we get here, so from this abstract stage, we go to a more richer stage, and more specifically, we're talking about more true universal set of institutions and practices. More specifically, we're talking about family, civil society, and the state. So these three elements. So family, civil society, and the state. So this is one other way of 1, 2, and 3. So family, civil society, and the state. The abstract stages, however necessarily they may be, lack self-sufficiency, subject to dialectical reversal. Why might a collective practice of freedom lack self-sufficiency in this sense? Again, an important question. One reason is that institutional structure operates effectively only if the established rules of conduct partially constituted is generally accepted as and followed. So only institutions are generally accepted and followed. For example, a system for property is to be established and maintained has beneficial consequences, people must, in general, respect property and persons of others. Following such rules of conduct often means accepting burdens, sacrifices, and at least forbearing from actions that are in one's own immediate self-interest. So if we imagine, so yes, so respect property. So in order to respect property, you need to accept burdens, sacrifices, and forbearing from actions which are in one's immediate self-interest. So again, so whims destroy freedom. This is basically what we're talking about. Yeah. One major reason why institutional structure may lack self-sufficiency is it fails to imbue people with a disposition to accept the burdens and sacrifices needed for its own maintenance and effective operation. So again, this is negative freedom destroys itself. Once again, negative freedom destroys itself. So imbue people with dispositions. So people have to have like an unconscious or automatic motivation to follow the law. So inclination to follow the law versus immediate, selfish, narrow self-interest. Okay, so again, motivation dispositions lead them to act in ways. So again, so property and contract imbue people with motivations and dispositions which lead people to act in ways in which actually undermines institution of property and freedom. So property and contract. So again, so more specifically, free market destroys free market. Well, it destroys what is destroyed? It destroys society, and consequently destroys the free market. Again, as we know, institutions encourage agents to think of themselves as independent. So the effective operation and survival of these institutions, the property and contract, depend on agents having certain ends and not having other ends. They must keep their contracts and not violate. So having certain ends and not having other ends. So take that Isaiah Berlin. So versus Isaiah Berlin, because Berlin thinks that sort of negative freedom is enough, but negative freedom is not enough. So they must keep the contracts, not violate property of others. But on its own, the market itself cannot guarantee that. So it's like market itself cannot guarantee that contracts will be kept. Like market relies on an external force to keep it operational. So more specifically, it relies on the fact that which will make people keep covenants, keep contracts. Is this similar to Fool's problem? Yes, this is Fool's problem from Homs. Hi to Homs. See, it's a wonderful text. We see all of our friends, Marx and Kant and Rousseau and now Homs, and even Marx. Yeah. So the argument is particular situation of persistent themes. Yeah, so destabilizing implications for established institutions. He argues pre-Socratic Greeks enjoy harmonious social existence. So this is important. Harmonious social existence, which they habitually fulfill the tasks and functions. So it's only when the sophist. So let me delete this. Yeah. So this is important. So this is I keep talking about the Greeks in which society destroys individuality. This is what we're talking about. Only when the sophists come to the scene, and again, the idea is Plato's Republic, found philosophical attempt to describe what a community would have to do, banning private property, etc., in order to forestall the development, disintegration. Okay. So Hegel's own project is not the Platonic one of finding ways of stabilizing individuals' subjectivity. Quite to the contrary, against Plato. His concern is to identify what features of the modern social world make a spirit of independent personality and subjective realizable in a stable and self-sufficient way. Spirit of, yeah, okay. Indeed, So one way of understanding is an attempt to develop solutions to contradictions set up by the institution of property and contract. Property and contract are necessary conditions, but they are self-undermining. So again, same thing. Negative freedom destroys itself. One institution is punishment. Punishment is supposed to orient individuals. Yeah, but you see, again, so this is very important. So long as agents possess only personality and not some deeper understanding, punishment remains indistinguishable from revenge. So individuals in a well-constituted state, must understand that punishment is not revenge. But from the standpoint of, for example, single brain-celled economists, Nobel Prize-winning economists like Gary Becker, there is no interesting difference between punishment and revenge. And this is why economists. Well, okay, this is I'm recording myself, so I should not say. But this is as Marx said at one point. Professor calls this analysis. Please. Okay. Again, so then we talk about morality, subjectivity. Yeah, so we talked about this before. So I'm gonna mostly skip this. So in morality, we have a picture of social world in which agents. So in morality, we have a picture of social world in which agents interact with each other, not just as persons to institutions of property contract, but also as subjects who have their own distinctive ends and their corresponding framework of responsibility, welfare, and goodness. Yeah, although this is probably less important. So, as with punishment, however, Hegel holds that morality and subjectivity are part of the resolution, but not the complete solution. Subjectivity is not the complete solution. There are two problems with attempting to resolve the contradiction. So, two separate problems. One is content of conscience. The other one, motivation of individuals. Content of conscience. The other, motivation of individuals. Okay, I'm not sure. This sounds very technical. I'm not sure we need. So this also seems advanced. Anyway, you know what? Let me skip over through all this and let me focus on the most important phrase. The most important phrase. So Hegel, morality is unable to provide guarantee. Morality is unable to provide either of these guarantees. So this is the important phrase. And then the most important phrase in all of Patten. So I already said this. So this is like on par with the other most important phrase. But this is like crucially important. Like learn this by heart. Okay, learn by heart. And here goes. Unless certain institutions are in place, there is no reason to suppose that individuals searching their conscience and considering their motives will make decisions that work to stabilize the institutional structure that has been established by the argument so far, and not to destroy it. Again, negative freedom destroys itself. In some sense, this is the central life. So what you need is ethical life. So again, so in this section we went from from abstract personhood through moral subjectivity. Now we talk about ethical membership. So we're talking about members of certain human beings, members of certain institutions. So family, civil society, and the state. These institutions impose duties, etc., etc. Ethical life is a sphere of virtue, because ethical institutions impose duties on their members and imbue them with the inclination to perform these duties. Imbue them with the inclination to perform these duties. Oh, this is very important. So imbue with inclination. Yeah. So civil society here identifies the realm of market relations. Yeah. So basically, civil society is the market. This is what we have here. Can I move this? Come on, work. Oh, this is not working. Yeah. So civil society is equal to the market, more or less. or I should say approximately equal to the market. Yeah. Again, so civil society or the market has a logic and dynamic of its own, importantly distinct. Logic and dynamic of its own, importantly distinct from other family, etc. So again, so we are talking about how market undermines society. So market activity association sphere. Yeah. So again, so this is invisible hand. So Hegel is impressed. So in Adam Smith, invisible hand. And Hegel supports this. He says market is good, but market needs to be regulated. So market. So for Hegel, market is good, but needs to be regulated. Otherwise, it will destroy itself and society. Okay, so contra civil society, the state, in Hegel's vocabulary, refers to a set of institutions and practices that are consciously directed around the universal, realizing citizens' higher good of freedom. So this is the definition of the state. Define state. Okay, so yeah, sovereign, executive, legislative powers, conditions of freedom, blah blah blah. Sovereign, executive, legislative have their maintenance of the conditions of freedom. So that's the task of the state. Task of the state is the condition of freedom. Is maintenance of the conditions of freedom. Other regarding, such as virtue and patriotism. Anyway, so freedom is the highest right. Yeah. The state consists in the march of God in the world. You will remember, Klosko gives a different. So compare to Klosko. Klosko gives a different translation. Some of you remember. He says, it is a way of God that there should be states. I don't want to write this now, but some of you do remember, I hope. Yeah, so we are talking about a rational state, constitutional monarchy, with powerful civil service and bicameral legislature. So like Plato, chief concern is to ensure that those with superior knowledge occupy key positions of power. Hegel's chief concern is, so this is very important. Civil service, especially selected on the basis of merit, meritocratic civil service elite. Commitment to the universal. So commitment to the general will, if you want. General. We're almost finished, by the way. Yeah. Yeah, so Hegel argues against direct legislation on the grounds that they are to feed too much power to untutored ambitions or itemized individuals. Instead, what Hegel wants is corporations. Yeah, so and also this from above by opponents, ministers, and the monarch, and below from the legislature. Below from the legislature. Yeah, so this one is core. So corporations instead of direct elections. Okay. Gypsies can play an important role. Okay, so all this is important. Read on your own. Okay, read it on your own. Read on your own. Read on your own. You don't need me to explain this. So according to Hegel, the full actualization of freedom can be achieved only if individuals are members of certain ethical institutions. We talked about this already before so many times, but let's repeat. Freedom is actualized in the ethical life. Those institutions and practices are integral part of the minimal self-sufficient, indispensable. So integral, indispensable. So again, it's like this is an answer to the question that freedom is only possible in the context of a well-constituted society. This is what we're talking about. Okay, so accept the burdens of sacrifices, whatever. Can tolerate high degree of independent personality, but only if crucial conditions are met. So Hegel can tolerate a degree of independent personality and subjectivity, but only if certain conditions are met. Its citizens must be members of ethical institutions that imbue them with goals, values, and convictions, and so forth, such that when they consult their own opinions and conscience about what to do, the answers they arrive at reinforce that order rather than ripping it apart. As happens, Hegel thinks that the ancient world, as recently as the French Revolution. Yeah. Yeah. So this is again key phrase. In fact, it's so important. I should probably copy this and paste this into our chat or something. Okay, almost. Yeah, so here he talks about the sentiment of affection characterized the family, mutual advantage, collegiality found in civil society, but they're not on their own sufficient to guarantee that people will accept sacrifices and burdens of freedom. Yeah. So the model of the family is not generalizable. The model of the family is not generalizable because the bonds of affections extend only as far as one's close member. And mutual advantage is limited and finite. So is good, but is ultimately limited and finite. So again, like you need the state because the family is not generalizable. You can only feel familial feelings to a small group of people, and mutual advantage is only limited and finite. That's why you need the state. Yeah, so it is only when a social order seeking to accommodate and promote subjectivity includes as its central and overarching institution the Hegelian state, and Hegel expects it to be stable and self-sufficient. Again, so this is important. So family and civil society are insufficient, need the state. Insufficient for what? Insufficient for freedom. Because otherwise, again, society destroys itself. And Hegel thinks that these institutions will be both effective and reliable. This is important. Read this. So effective in the sense that they effectively stabilize and preserve, and reliable in the sense that they do tend to exercise this capacity rather than abusing their power and authority. Okay. So Hegel thinks that starting from basic commitment to free personality, number of familiar ideas, reconciliation with the modern state. Yeah. More permanent conception of freedom, not self-sufficient. So yeah, we need specific codes because moral permanent conditions of freedom are not self-sufficient. Again, we talked about this so many times. Unless individuals are oriented to specific duties and virtues, committing virtues of good citizen, social order would not be stable and self-reproducing. Again, same idea, different words. Okay. Yeah. Protect and preserve the social political setting needed for its own freedom to be possible. He's willing his own freedom, and in the sense enjoys objective as well as subjective freedom. Again, so Hegel's significance. We're almost done. So we talk about left Hegelians. Oh, yeah, I mean, we talk about fascists. We talk about left Hegelians. Read this on your own. So there's also Marx. Whoops. And Kierkegaard. And very important, you have communitarianism and John Rawls. Communitarian critique of Rawlsian liberalism. If you understand this, again, this is advanced, but first-class honor students should be able to understand what we're talking about. So Lee Stedic would have also a suggestion that he's the proto-totalitarian glorifier of the Prussian totalitarianism. For Hegel, a social order is only worthy of reconciliation if it actually. So again, Hegel is not is not a state worshipper, because a social order is only worthy of reconciliation if it actualizes freedom, and this means that such order must respect and promote both subjective and objective freedom. So not a not a state worshipper. State worshipper. We're almost done. Yeah, so again, so we talk about communitarian reception of Hegel, blah blah blah. Yeah, the picture of Hegel as a liberal reformer. Hegel preoccupied with the fragility of collective practices of freedom, vulnerability of these practices to individualism, egoism, and indifference of those who participate in them. Yeah, the constant danger is that the social political setting that encourages freedom will disintegrate into anarchy and chaos, or easily supplanted by oppressive and authoritarian regimes. So this is again, say hi, negative. Freedom destroys itself. So many times I'm talking about this, repeating this. For Hegel, however, there's no turning back from pre-reactive state of harmony. Like you cannot go back. Like subjective element is necessary and indispensable. Once individuality and subjectivity have made their entrance into the world history, their claims cannot be denied. The challenge is to discover what features of modern social life allow individuality and subjectivity to flourish in a stable and self-reproducing way. So basically, how can a social order realize the principles of the French Revolution without generating the terror and Napoleon as well? In working through these tensions and ambiguities, Hegel's political outlook between reformism and conservatism. So Hegel is both a reformist and a conservative. He's also a liberal and a communitarian. It's helpful to bear in mind his preoccupation with this consolidation problem. In the wake of 1989, it's not less a problem for us than it was in the generation that witnessed 1789. Okay, people, and congratulations. We have finished Boucher. And we have done this in exactly 1 minute, 1 hour and 30 minutes. I'm proud. Let's take a break.